Hey guys, I just wanted to give a brief synopsis of how the Bible addresses illegal immigration. We are watching illegal immigration in Europe and even legal immigration in Europe destroy those countries with Islamic immigration. And obviously, the Joe Biden administration allowed 10 to 12 million illegals into our country. Many of them are Muslim, many of them are criminals, many of them are part of the cartels, and it's destroyed our country. We're thank God that Trump is using ICE to get rid of a lot of the criminal activities. But we need to understand immigration, and whether it's legal or illegal immigration, from a biblical standpoint. Unfortunately, the apostate church is controlling the narrative about immigration and illegal immigration, and they're misusing the biblical text and not giving all of the text that they use that describes immigration that would happen in the nation of Israel and how God responded to that. So I wanted to take us through a brief synopsis of that so that you can use this as kind of some talking points to deal with immigration, legal or illegal, and how the Bible responds to that. So first of all, let's understand this. The subject of illegal immigration is not political. It is profoundly moral and biblical. And God has spoken clearly on national borders, assimilation, obedience to authority, personal responsibility. So I want to approach this issue from Scripture and not with emotion, because emotion tends to override people's perceptions about what's going on. No one is saying to treat people wrong. Everyone is made in the image of God, but there is a biblical way to handle legal and illegal immigration. First, the Bible teaches assimilation into the host nation, and whether that's illegal or legal immigration. When foreigners entered Israel, okay, in the Old Testament, they were expected to adopt Israel's laws, its values, its worship. Exodus 12, 48 through 49 says, "And when a stranger dwells with you and wants to keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and let him come near and keep it, and he shall be as a native of the land. For no uncircumcised person shall eat of it. One law shall be for the native born and for the stranger who dwells among you." There it is, guys. God welcomed the foreigner, but required them to assimilate, not form a competing culture like Islam does in America or the West. Second, Scripture shows that the language unity mattered. Foreigners living in Israel had to embrace Hebrew to participate fully in the covenant life of Israel. Check this out. Nehemiah 13, 23 to 24 says, "In those days, I also saw Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod and could not speak the language of Judah, but spoke according to the language of one or the other people." So here we are, Nehemiah rebuking his own Jews, own fellow Jews, because they had lost the language, and the language was Hebrew, that led to spiritual decline and national fragmentation. And he got on to them about that. No, you need to speak Hebrew. You guys are speaking foreign languages. So part of the assimilation is to learn the language of the culture. Third, the Bible requires immigrants to accept the culture and the laws of that new nation. So under both the Old and New Testaments, God commands obedience to civil authority. Romans 13, 1 through 7 states, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinances of God. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. For he is God's minister to you for good. For because of this, you also pay taxes. Render therefore to all their due." So entering a country illegally is resisting the lawful authority and therefore resisting God. So illegal immigration, totally wrong, totally immoral. Fourth, the ends do not justify the means. Wanting a better life does not give anyone the biblical permission to break another nation's laws. Acts 5:29 says, but Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men. Immigration law does not force anyone to sin. Our current immigration laws are not breaking any of God's commandments. Therefore, the laws that are on the books in the United States must be obeyed by people. Fifth, Scripture forbids entering in a nation simply to live off its welfare system. 2 Thessalonians 3:10 says, for even when we were with you, we commanded you this, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. 1 Timothy 5:8 says, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially those of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever or an infidel. So taking resources that you did not earn or burdening others with an unwillingness to work violates biblical morality. And that constitutes the majority of illegal immigrants that come into our country, whether it's Europe or here in America, and take advantage of the welfare system. Free education, free healthcare, free money, free programs, all of that. The average illegal alien is taking about $45,000 to $50,000 per year in government aid. That's not what that's for. 6, importing people who hate the host nation and its values and its culture is not biblical, nor is it wise. For instance, look at Minnesota, look at Michigan. They provide modern day examples here in America where Muslim immigrants from Somalia have introduced hostility toward American law, against American culture and our freedoms. Judges 2:3 says, therefore, I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become a thorn in your side. And so what has happened? By importing Islamic groups and not making them assimilate, not making them learn the language, letting them practice Sharia law, has become a thorn in the side of Western culture. It has definitely become a thorn in the side of Europe. And it's definitely now starting to become a thorn in our side in America. We have the Somali fraud that just happened in Minnesota, where the Somalis were told to tell the welfare system that all their kids are autistic, and they took billions of dollars in and then shipped that money into Somalia to fund terroristic groups. How you like that? Thank God Trump is starting to stop that, and maybe some of these Somali Muslims that have taken advantage that came here illegally will be deported here shortly. I hope so. But anyway, these groups that refuse to assimilate and rejects a nation's values, they destabilize our country spiritually and socially. For instance, I heard this morning on Glenn Beck that some of these Texas schools, these public schools, are now changing their food in the cafeteria to meet halal standards. Wait a second, we're not in some Muslim country. We are in America. We're not going to change whether we serve hot dogs to our kids and pizza and whatever so we can fit some Muslim Sharia law of being halal compliant. I don't think so. That's insane. That's called destabilizing our country. 7th, Scripture condemns bringing in unvetted individuals who pose a danger to society. We brought in all these Afghanis, and what did they do? They ended up shooting some of our National Guard before Thanksgiving, killed 2 of them. And we have all these Afghanis who are more loyal to Sharia law and Islam than they are our own country. And they're shouting Allahu Akbar while they're here and doing things for Allah's cause. Look, man, the United States is importing migrants from nations that offer no identification, like these Afghanistanis. We don't know who they are. We have no background verification. We have no ability to know their criminal history. Of course, Venezuela has allowed a lot of their prisoners to come into our country, a lot of the insane asylums from their country to come into our country. So we have a bunch of crazy people running around. Many of these people that we've imported from India are driving trucks with no license. They don't know English comprehension. They don't know how to read our signs. And they've had recent crashes with these guys from India driving semis and driving illegally and killing Americans because they can't read signs or follow the laws. Romans 13:4 says the government, for he is God's minister for your good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. A government that allows uncontrolled entry fails its God-given duty to protect its people. And so people are being killed by that. 8, Scripture forbids importing criminality. Illegal immigration has brought increases in drug trafficking, sex crimes, sex gangs, rape gangs, gang activity, DUIs, murder, and the list goes on and on and on. Romans 13:4 again says, for he is God's minister to an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. A nation that invites or excuses lawlessness violates God's design for civil order. 9th, spiritual blindness is also a national issue. Isaiah 5:20 says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Our modern culture embraces what we call toxic compassion or unbiblical compassion, or the other word that's been used out there is toxic empathy. This is where compassion is divorced from truth, where compassion is divorced from justice and boundaries, biblical boundaries. And what's happened is people are being afraid to say anything about it because they don't want to be labeled racist or xenophobic, and they fear being labeled a racist or xenophobic more than they fear violating Scripture. Ephesians 4:17-18 says this I say, therefore, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk in the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened because of the blindness of their heart. So moral blindness of being compassionate without truth, compassionate without boundaries, destroys a nation's ability to make righteous decisions. 10th, nations in Scripture always had borders. They defended them and determined who could enter. Israel welcomed the foreigner, no doubt about that, yet they required assimilation and obedience to its laws if you cross that border. Numbers 15:15-16 says, what an ordinance shall be for you of the assembly and for the stranger who dwells with you, an ordinance forever through your generations. One law, one custom shall be for you and the stranger who dwells with you. Did you notice that? Not a separate law for the stranger. The Bible nowhere teaches open borders. And illegal immigration violates Scripture because it comes in by unlawful authority. Remember this, Romans 13 was written under Nero, an unjust ruler, yet believers were still commanded to obey the laws unless directly they were commanded to sin, and they could disobey at that point in time. A law's difficulty or inconvenience does not nullify its authority. The biblical principle is clear. Obey the law of the land. Do not break them or encourage others to break them. And here's the thing. As we just saw, you did not get to practice an alternative law. You had to follow the law of that country. That's why the Scripture said one law. That's it. There's one law, and the foreigner will keep that law. And that was the law of Israel, the law of Moses at that time. So anyway, if people think immigration law is unjust, well, then change it by lawful means. Don't try to rebel against it. Vote for it, petition it, but do not sin in the process. And compassion must never override righteousness and justice and the law. Righteousness must never erase compassion. That's true. And Scripture holds the two together. And basically, we have to do the same. We have to hold the law and compassion at the same time. Can we have compassion on human beings? Absolutely. But we cannot allow human beings to break the law. That's the end doesn't justify the means. So let's keep that in mind when we're looking at immigration, whether it's legal or illegal, and let's face this as the Bible would want us to practice it and deal with it in that regard. Okay?
Because the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that